I arrived at Red Willow Ranch the morning the lawyers came. Cottonwood down drifting like slow snow and the windmill squeaking as if it remembered every drought. My cousin Tyler was on the porch, boots on Granddad's trunk, grinning like he'd roped the moon. "50 million, cuz," he laughed, tapping the railing with a silver ring Granddad never would have worn. "The $50 million ranch is ours now." I didn't answer. Grief had sanded my voice to a quiet edge. The house smelled of saddle soap and coffee, but without Granddad moving through rooms, the space felt too wide, like the prairie had slipped indoors. The attorneys took over the dining table, spreading out folders, plats, and a valuation report that made the land look like a billboard instead of a body. I signed where they pointed and listened to phrases like succession, water rights, and development tracts. Tyler kept chuckling, talking about new trucks, parcel maps, about what he called unlocking value. I kept seeing Granddad's hands, scarred knuckles, thumb twisted from a roping accident, dirt that never left the creases. He'd taught me the names of every arroyo and the way storms walked on three legs, wind, dust, and thunder. He used to say, "Land remembers who loves it." When the meeting broke, I slipped outside that day. Sun poured over the south pasture, turning mesquite to bronze. My boots found the old path to the saddle barn without thinking. The hinges moaned. A ribbon of light cut the hay dust and lit Granddad's saddle on its stand. Rawhide reins coiled like a sleeping question. Under the horn, tucked where only a rider would feel, was an envelope with my name. My hands shook as I slid it free. The envelope was stiff and warm from my palm. I slid it with a hoof pick and unfolded a single page lined in blue, the handwriting tight as barbed wire. "Kid," it began, the only name he ever used for me. "If you're reading this, I've gone where the wind never quits." He wrote about water first. He always did. The spring below Coyote Bluff, the seep in the limestone, the shallow aquifer that made grass honest through July. Guard the water and the water guards you. Then fences, which posts rot first, the way corner braces hold families together as well as wire. Halfway down, a map appeared in pencil, arroyos like veins, a star near the north section fence. "Saddle the dun mare, ride at dawn," he wrote. "Where the ant bed makes a shadow, dig. You'll find a tobacco tin. Inside, the key." I heard Tyler's truck door slam in the yard and read faster. Granddad's last lines were lean and final. "Lawyers talk ownership. We talk caretaking. This land carries debt to the dead and a note to the unborn. If they push to sell, say nothing until you see what I left. Then decide." I folded the page twice, then again, until it fit behind my belt like a talisman. Dust fell in slow spirals. The dun mare nickered from the end stall as if she'd been waiting for orders. I saddled her the way he taught. Cinch snug, breast collar straight, latigo laid flat like truth. On my way out, Tyler blocked the doorframe, smile hard as a spur. "You hiding love letters?" I slipped past him and said only, "Sun's good. I'm checking water." The mare blew out a breath. We stepped into the afternoon, carrying a map that felt heavier than any deed today. I left the yard at a ground cover lope, the dun's ears flicking with every meadowlark whistle. Past the windmill, past the bone-white cottonwood where Granddad tied calves, the world settled into hoof rhythm and sun. The map in my shirt pocket pressed a certainty against my ribs. The north fence lay 3 miles of sun and sand away, a stitch line between our pasture and the neighbor's mesquite. I rode the draw, letting the dun climb where limestone rose and prickly pear leaned like green shields. Clouds built slow anvils over the far hills, thunder stacked high like a city we'd never visit. At the corner brace, I swung down. The star on Granddad's pencil map matched a rusted branding iron wired to the top wire, one he'd shaped years ago, his crooked initial nested inside a 5-point flare. Below it, ants moved in a red river, their mound casting a precise shadow like the letter promised. I dug with my hands first, then a shovel from the scabbard, peeling back caliche, smelling damp earth where none should be. 2 feet down, the blade clanged. A round tobacco tin, green paint ghosted, came with clay clinging to its seams. I sat on my heels and waited until my breath matched the horse's. Then I twisted. The lid cracked loose, releasing a smell of dust and peppermint. Inside lay a brass key on rawhide, a folded bank envelope, and a note. For the courthouse vault, box 312. Wind came hard off the flats, blowing grit across my teeth. I looked north, where barbed wire met horizon, and realized he hadn't hidden something from us. He'd hidden something for me. I pocketed the key, mounted up, and turned toward town at dusk. I reached town after dark, Main Street blinking, a pharmacy clock keeping worse time than the wind. The courthouse sat like a stone bull, white steps worn by weddings and arraignments. I tied the dun to oak, grit settling under my collar, the letter's fold still printing my skin. The clerk on duty looked ready to lock up. I signed the visitor book, voice even. Records office, safe deposit. He pointed without asking names. Country towns collect their questions slowly. Answers arrive slower. Downstairs smelled of old books and winter. A caged counter, a register, a wall of little brass doors. Box 312 waited waist-high, quiet as a prayer before rain. I set Granddad's key in the slot and turned. Metal clicked in the manner of finality. Inside lay a manila folder, a leather notebook, and an envelope sealed with red wax pressed by the old ranch brand. I lifted the folder first. Survey maps, water filings, an unrecorded mineral deed, and a conservation easement drafted but never filed. In the margin, Granddad's pencil. Not land to sell, land to keep working. The notebook carried 3 years of rain totals, calf weights, pasture rotations, and 1 page titled Succession When I Can't Saddle. Names, tasks, warnings. 1 line read, Tyler runs numbers, kid runs grass, only one knows both. My hands hesitated over the wax. I warmed it with my palm, peeled the seal, and unfolded a letter. He wrote plain, that oil men tested deep strata, that a developer offered to carve houses along the ridge, that he'd said yes once, then sat awake a month tasting dust. He called it betrayal he intended to unsay. The letter named a buyer I did not expect, and a deadline already walking our way. The name on the letter stopped me cold. Mesquite Ridge Holdings, LLC, with a manager listed as Tyler R. Kane. I had expected strangers, not my cousin wearing a paper mask. Granddad wrote that he'd agreed in principle after a bad drought, then spent a month smelling dust he called shame. He could not sleep. He could not pray. He decided to unsay the yes. The unsaying lived in the folder. A notarized water assignment transferred every spring, well, ditch, and groundwater permit to the Red Willow Trust, naming me trustee upon his death. Without those rights, the ranch could not be carved or flipped. The easement drafts bound the ridge from houses forever, if recorded before closing. A penciled line gave me the clock. 10 business days from probate notice. Yesterday had been day 1. I closed the vault box and felt the building breathe. Out on the square, Tyler leaned against his truck, phone glittering like a lure. He waved, big, careless. "Paperwork done?" he called. "Almost," I said. "Good. I got a buyer ready to move." I slid Granddad's letter back under my belt. "We'll do right by him," I answered. Tyler laughed, tapping his watch. "Right is a wire by Friday." I walked past him, hearing spurs that weren't there. The courthouse door closed and the town grew quiet as rangeland after lightning. 10 days, a trust, a cousin wearing 2 faces, and a promise that now weighed more than money. I turned toward the notary, toward the clerk, toward every stamp the law required, and began the work that would make yes into no and no into care. Outside, the windmill turned slow, each squeak a metronome for courage, reminding me the land keeps time with effort, not applause, never signatures alone, on paper. Morning brought the kind of blue sky that looks merciful from a distance and merciless up close. I was at the clerk's desk when they unlocked the doors, papers squared. I slid the trust assignment, the water filings, and the conservation easement draft across the counter. The clerk read the caption twice. "You sure?" she asked. I nodded. Unsaying begins with ink. We notarized signatures first. The notary stamped, date bleeding through like a cattle brand. I initialed margins, corrected a parcel number, and added the meets and bounds exhibit Granddad had tucked in his notebook. The phone in my pocket kept buzzing. Tyler, then unknown. I let the calls run out like a bad well. At records, a woman in turquoise glasses checked legal descriptions and fee schedules. "Easement runs with the land," she said, tapping the ridge map. "Once recorded, it's a wall made of paper." She fed each page into the scanner, then pressed a red seal that sounded like a hammer on anvil. The timestamp printed, 10:14 a.m., day 2. The wall stood. Next was water. I filed the assignments to the Red Willow Trust, trustee line bearing my name. The title examiner frowned, then nodded as the chain cleared, finally. "Without water," he said, "a deed is a postcard." I paid from my own account, feeling the number drop and my resolve rise. At lunch, I walked the square, counting windows like fence posts. Tyler's truck idled at the bank. He never saw me pass behind him. Inside, I placed a courtesy copy with the loan officer and another with the county attorney. By dusk, the filings populated the index. I rode home through cottonwood shadows, pockets lighter, backbone heavier, and the windmill kept time for what would come next. Tyler arrived before sunrise, headlights sweeping the barn like a searchlight, radio low, laughter gone. He didn't bother with hello. He strode into the saddle aisle, boots biting gravel, jaw tight. I was oiling the Dunn's reins, pretending routine could hold the roof. He held up his phone. Screenshots glowed, recording receipts, timestamps, my signature nested under Granddad's. "You filed," he said. No question, only weather. "You stuck the ridge in concrete and moved the water." I set the rag down. I honored him. He paced twice like a penned colt smelling lightning. Honored him would have been paying estate taxes with a clean sale and sending Aunt May to Arizona. Now you've made me the villain in a movie nobody asked to watch. Wind ran through the cottonwoods, a dry applause. I thought of Granddad's line, "Land remembers who loves it." "The trust keeps us solvent," I said. "Grazing carries the note. Hunting leases bridge the drought years. We can add a small farm stay, keep the school contracts, refinance at winter rates. There are ways." He stared, unblinking. "Ways that don't include my plans." He lifted a hand toward the pasture. "Do you see 50 million blowing across that grass?" "I do. Every gust." I felt my voice steady. "I see cows, quail, and a spring that never gave up on July. I see work." He lowered the phone, softer and more dangerous. "Mesquite Ridge doesn't like surprises. They don't like losing water. They especially don't like cousins who think paper beats money." Hawks circled above the far pivot, soldering silence. He leaned close enough to smell cologne built for boardrooms, not pens. "Last chance," he whispered. "Undo it." I met his eyes and shook my head. The weather changed. A storm began without clouds, over the corrals. The storm started with phone calls that didn't leave voicemails, trucks idling just beyond the mailbox, and the kind of silence cattle notice first. I kept working small, greasing hinges, doctoring a cracked hoof, checking float valves like prayer beads. Granddad's letter had told me where to dig, file, and stand my ground. It hadn't told me why Tyler wore a buyer's brand. That answer lived in places ink rarely reaches. In the office, I pulled the bottom drawer and found the cigar box that never held cigars. Inside, a ledger bound with twine, a folded photo of Granddad and Tyler on a yearling in 002, and a promissory note stamped private. Tyler's signature sat beside a number big enough to bend a life. The lender wasn't a bank. Mesquite Ridge had advanced him money 2 droughts ago, equipment, feed, a shiny truck for hauling investors. The note matured on probate. Collateral listed proceeds from contemplated sale of Red Willow Ranch and associated water rights. I read that line until the paper felt hot. The letter had not said Tyler was cornered. It had not said he'd promised what wasn't his to promise. I looked up at the ridge and remembered Granddad's quiet way of measuring men. Not by talk, but by what they tried to save when things burned. Past sundown, I saddled the dun and rode the fence line, letting the land audit me. Nighthawks stitched the last light. Coyotes tuned up in the draws. At the north corner, I dismounted, pressed my palm to the post where the branding iron hung, and listened. The ranch answered the only way it knows, through wind on wire, through a spring ticking under stone. The letter hadn't said this either, that keeping faith might mean losing kin, and that love of land sometimes sounds like breaking. I was fixing the windmill brake when a black Suburban nosed through the gate. Dust rolled ahead of it like a small front. Tyler climbed out first, hat low, followed by 2 men in crisp denim and a woman with a leather portfolio. They walked like survey stakes already planted. She introduced herself as Claire Benton, Mesquite Ridge. Her smile measured fences. She thanked me for the coffee I didn't offer and opened the portfolio. Inside lay glossy maps, pastel tracts, a rendering of our ridge wearing cul-de-sacs like jewelry. Numbers shone. Purchase price, timeline, indemnities, a bridge loan that would make Tyler whole and make me quiet. I let her talk. The windmill pumped behind us, stitching the sky to the earth, one steady clank at a time. When she finished, the yard was as still as an held breath. I recorded an easement, I said. I moved the water into trust. She knew. Of course she knew. The second man slid a document across the saddle stand, a withdrawal agreement, a consent to vacate, a mutual release. There is money for doing nothing, he said. A lot of money. I read every line while not moving my boots. The release tasted like tin. The ridge doesn't wear houses, I said, folding it shut. Not while I'm breathing. Claire didn't flinch. She set down a smaller envelope, heavy as a spur. Short-term note, she said lightly. Your cousin's obligations. We become creditors if you force default. We would prefer not to collect from family. Tyler watched the ground. I imagined the weight of his promise pulling him sideways like a bad saddle. The dun flicked a fly from her flank and stamped once. I won't sign, I said, but I'll meet. Courthouse steps. Bring your paper. I'll bring land. They showed at noon under a hard, dry sky, the courthouse square bright enough to make marble look like bone. I arrived on horseback because I wanted the land to stand. The dun blew, watching pigeons strut like jurors. Mesquite Ridge unfolded binders. Claire's pen tapped time. Tyler lingered behind them, hat brim low, a weather vane in borrowed wind. I set my folder down and laid out my terms the way Granddad taught. Simple, clean, spoken once. The conservation easement remains. The Red Willow Trust retains all water rights, administered by me. Grazing continues under existing leases. No sale of ridge or springs. No roads across Coyote Bluff. I will license pipeline repair access. Nothing more. Claire smiled without warmth and translated my words into margins. She countered with numbers in places where I had said no. I answered with exhibits, rainfall records, wildlife surveys, school contracts, a budget that balanced. My plan was not a windfall. It was a wind that never quits. We stepped through each clause until dust rose around our boots. The county attorney watched from shade, unreadable as a distant storm. Tyler spoke, voice thinner than I remembered. He wanted time. He wanted the note buried. He wanted out. I wanted him whole, but not at the land's expense. I offered a buyout of his share, financed through a state conservation loan and a cooperative grazing advance. He blinked like a man waking. Claire closed her binder. She said my offer left money on the table. I said the table belonged to the dead and the unborn. She said she would recommend litigation. I said the filings sang. When we parted, clouds had finally gathered. The first grit hit my teeth like a promise kept. Dusk slid over Red Willow like a blanket that knew every crease. I walked the fence line on foot, testing wires with my palm, hammering a loose staple, breathing the metallic smell that rides ahead of weather. Crickets tuned in the draws. Lightning stitched pale threads far beyond Coyote Bluff, too distant to speak, close enough to promise. Back at the saddle barn, I trimmed a frayed latigo, set out a coil of new rope, and wiped dust from Granddad's saddle horn the way you brush a name on a headstone. The letter wrote again behind my belt, warm as a second spine. I read it once more at the tack bench, letting each penciled map settle where fear wanted to perch. The words did what they always did, turned dread into tasks. Inside the house, I spread budgets along the kitchen table. Numbers were quiet animals. If handled steadily, they didn't bolt. The plan held. Calf crop, school contracts, habitat credit, a fall clinic for 4-H riders, 2 cabins tucked into mesquite without scarring the ridge. The note to buy out Tyler's share waited like a gate. Simple hinge, heavy panel. My phone lit the counter. A text from him blinked. "Don't let them take everything." I stared at it long enough to hear what wasn't written. Panic rubbing against pride. I typed nothing back. Some things call for presence, not replies. I stepped onto the porch. The windmill clicked a slower time. Bats skimmed the tank, stitching quick cursive I couldn't read. Somewhere a truck lingered on the county road, then left. The first cold gust arrived, smelling of cedar and far thunder. I pictured Granddad rolling his shoulders before a storm, saying, "Work small, and storms stay large." I shut the gate on the corral, latched it twice, and let night finish the chores I couldn't. The storm reached the ranch at dawn, shouldering the sky wide open. I woke to the tin roof drumming and the smell of dust turning dark. The dun nickered from the pen. The windmill spun free, a silver blade in fast prayer. I pulled on my jacket and stepped into water, already finding the low places Granddad taught me to watch. By mid-morning, the creek left its banks and shouldered through the cottonwoods. I moved salt blocks uphill, opened a gate to let the heifers climb, and checked the siphon at the south tank. Work made fear quiet. Near noon, Tyler's truck pushed the flooded crossing and slid into the yard crooked. He climbed out, soaked, eyes raw, no swagger left to hold the rain back. He said only that Mesquite Ridge had accelerated the note and that men I would not like were on their way. I felt something settle that wasn't resignation. Storms teach you what is yours to carry. I handed him a slicker and led him to the tack room. We spread maps on the bench, weighted corners with stirrups, and I explained the buyout plan again, slower, like counting cattle through a gate. He stared a long time at Granddad's pencil marks, then at the ridge drawn like a sleeping animal. The rain eased. He said he could sign if I promised Aunt May would not lose her house and if his name might remain on the brand. I told him both were already true. Thunder moved farther east. Near dark, the wind fell. I set 2 chairs by the open door of the saddle barn. We signed our names where the notary would, then shook like men agreeing to mend more than fence. The rain ticking on tin sounded like relief finding its level. Morning found the ranch rinsed clean, the air like a new ledger. The creek retreated to its banks, leaving bright ribbons of silt that mapped where panic had traveled and where it had decided to rest. I walked the ridge with a thermos and a quiet that felt earned. The grass drank light. The windmill kept a steady prayer. calves bald, alive. I thought about ledgers that don't take ink, the hawk routes over Coyote Bluff, the seep that remembers July, the shade a cottonwood throws on a year when money throws none. Granddad's letter rode like a second spine, but the pages I needed were in the ground, sandstone, seed bank, tracks drying into answers. By the time Tyler arrived, the sky had the soft color of a forgiven bruise. We carried the signed papers to town, not to boast, but to make them real where records make memory hold. The notary stamped. The clerk smiled, the smile of people who know storms end because work persisted. We filed the buyout, recorded the easement confirmations, and logged the water assignments a final time so no one could claim thirst as a strategy. Back at the ranch, I unsaddled the dun and hung Granddad's bridle where his hand used to. The barn smelled of wet leather and relief. I set the letter on the tack bench and read the last paragraph aloud, the one I had avoided. Keep a kid on a horse, keep a teacher in a contract, keep a gate swinging smooth so no one has to lift what a hinge can carry. If the market ever tries to buy your patience, charge too much. Evening took the heat kindly. I walked to the ridge. The land said thank you in grass and sky. I answered by promising to stay.